Go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Friday, February 23rd, 2018, and this is our weekly Country Roads report with Winston Shrout. And we have Winston with us. How are you today, Winston?
Well, fair to Midland, like they say.
Fair to Midland. Folks, this is our 198th Goldfish Report today, and this is really remarkable that we've made it this far, but we couldn't have done it without viewer support. This is a viewer-supported public media channel, and so I want to thank all the people who have contributed to Goldfish Report. It's because of you that we've kept this going, and it's because of you that you can continue to send in links and articles to reports that we publish on our news channel, and it's because of you and that we're doing this. So I love that viewers want to participate and you contribute in any way that you can, because this is all for you, and I want everybody to feel like when they contribute they're part of it, and you are. So thank you so much. And this is Goldfish Report is always a home for people who feel like they want to contribute. And what I want to kind of start with today, Winston's going to get into talking about mortgages in a little bit more detail and some remedies, since we brought it up in our last Country Roads report. But I did notice some new posts today from Q, or actually it was from yesterday or late yesterday, and I want to just share them with you because they're important messages. So I'm going to screen share that really quickly. And I just wanted to point to everyone's direction that, Q is saying here, people kill people. You are watching a movie. And this is, of course, what Jim Fetzer has said, because it came, in our POTUS reports, which, he says there was even a soundtrack, which I also noticed in that Las Vegas attack. They want you to be weak. And when he refers to they're talking about the deep state. So they want to take our guns. This is all about Second Amendment, by the way. They want us to be their slave, their sheep, and they're creating distractions. So just realize this is what's going on. They want you divided. How can some be so blind? I ask myself that question all the time. I have family members that I can't talk about these reports with. They just don't want to, they aren't ready. They're just not ready. Oops. Help them wake up. We try. We try 198 Goldfish reports. We are trying very hard. Estimated 20 million reached. Question everything. Keep talking. Unless they get violent with you, keep talking. That's my approach, because at some point something's going to hit, where they can't keep rationalizing, they can't keep giving plausible deniability. And I'm going to give you an example of that. Stand up, fight, 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 they're saying. How do they control children? What prevents a child from revealing the truth? Q. So here you have, how do you break up something this big? What happens if low, mid, senior, non-corrupt patriots learn they were sold out? What happens? I guess what they're trying to do is say, look, folks, if we let all of this information out right away, people are going to revolt. It's going to be ugly. It's not going to be really beneficial. They want to do this. I'm sure they want full disclosure. We want full disclosure, but it has to be a little bit at a time, because there's people that you can't talk about with this stuff. But until they see it on mainstream media, they're just not going to believe it. So they know they have to take control of the media in order to get the information out and to really wake people up. But they have to do it little by little. I think you can go a little bit faster. You need one big story that's going to break, where there's going to be arrests, there's going to be prosecutions, and there's going to be prison. This has to happen, and this will get the ball rolling. That's what I think. Because he says, what do you think? So who is waiting with open arms with a plan to reorganize under a single entity with direct OS by trusted patriots? I would say that's POTUS. Who are trusted patriots and who understand intel collection. So I think we have our militia and, of course, our generals, our white hat generals that are in the military. For those watching, this should scare you. And they're directly talking to the cabal now, or the deep state, okay? It's the power you depend on to survive. The power that they're talking about is keeping us ignorant, keeping us in in debt, in slavery, and keeping us starving, really poor, and this is and ignorant. So they control that television, they control your mind, and they do. They have. Money is worthless without those in power serving you. White hat or White House military patriots ready to play. Yes. So I'm responding directly to Q. We're ready. We're ready. We're ready. We're going. We're with you. So the trader sold saps. I don't know. What do you think a sap is?
I
Um,
don't know.
okay, we'll try to think about what that is. I'm doing this very quickly. So this is someone responding to Q. Of course, Q is responding to this. You can read this on your own, folks. Glad to see you here again, Q. This confirmation feels great. You guys in POTUS are awesome. Thank you again for all of this and everything you do. Gratitude. And Q wrote, did you count the spaces in the tweet and cross-reference against spaces left here to match meaning? And so this is what he's talking about here. Oh, wait, there's one other one. Hold on a second before we move to that one. Clowns revealed in China and other places. So we're talking CIA, all right, 2010. 187, which is I think that's the number, the code number for murder or dead on arrival or something like that. Sold Intel, HRC open source server, missing emails, CrowdStrike. So this is referring to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Granted access, betrayed the USA, only the tip of the iceberg. Okay, this will be made public soon. That's what we need to do, is get this made public. And then finally, I wanted to show this here, if I can just click on that. What many people don't understand or don't want to understand is that Wayne, Chris, and the folks who work so hard at the NRA are great people and great American patriots. They love our country and will do the right thing. Now look, count all the spaces here. Make America great again. So this is the POTUS, this is the president's tweet. And then how do I have to, wait a second, go back to this. And you'll see here in the Q post that this is I hear you. So here is another Q post with these tests, which seem to all be military type comments here. And it's referring to, they're numbering the fingers here. This is at the White House. This looks like POTUS himself. He's got 45 right here on his cufflink. So that looks like it's probably him. He's holding, what would you want me to know about your experience? That's the first question. What can we do to help you feel, I don't know, maybe that's safe. And then number 5 says, I hear you. And so this is referencing, you have to go and cross-reference these comments, folks, because this is where all the inside information is going to be. So clearly that's the president holding that card with these questions. He says, we fill in the blanks. He hears us. We insert something here and show we understand how this works. Whatever the board consensus is, it will be. So this is pretty important. I mean, I think we're kind of on the precipice of something really major shape, coming. I don't know how soon it will happen, but it does look like, clearly that would look like POTUS because it had 45 on his cufflink. So that's him. And he very much wants to know how this is going on the board and how people are understanding the questions. And so, that's why when Scott Werner, when we did our last interview, Winston and Scott suggested, oh, actually, that was the day we missed you that day, but Scott had suggested for viewers to write the president a letter of support and let him know how much that we're appreciative of what he's doing and that we are supporting him. And so I still encourage people to do that, because on that video we have the address on the description section. So this is it. The methods that they have used to divide us are numerous, and that is the goal. That's why we have to be united. Red pilling people is not easy, folks, but that's what we try to do on the GoldFish Report. So one of the things and one of the ways that we tried to cope with this in real time in commerce is with Winston, of course. And so I'm going to hand it over to Winston. I just wanted folks to kind of be aware of the connections that Q's trying to make, and, try to spread the information and try to help wake people up. And, you really can't worry if they like you. It's not about a popularity contest. It's about trying to wake people up. So the greater the consciousness, the more we win. And that's what the answer is. So what Winston's trying to do, what we're trying to do today on GoldFish Report, is waking people up. The more we know, the knowledge is power. The knowledge is power. So go ahead, Winston. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, okay.
Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, I'll just make a few comments before I get started here, because we're going to talk about mortgages a little bit more extensively, and then we're going to start talking about some of the things that can be done to deal with the problem. But I wanted to comment on this word patriot. It's a word I almost never use. It's back to the same problem that we've talked about. The first five letters of patri.
Parent.
Yeah, it's on the patriarchal side of things. So I don't personally like to use that word. And over the years, this kind of had put a bad taste in my mouth anyway. I remember years and years ago, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 13 years ago, we had gone to Boston to do a seminar, and some of the local quote unquote patriots, because they were so steeped in common law as they thought, they boycotted it, and even encouraged other people not to come to it because they did not like the concept of commercial law and some of the things that was involved in it. And that was really ignorant, for them to take that position. If they decided they didn't want to hear it, that's one thing. But to tell other people that, Winston's a phony and a fraud and all this kind of stuff, and disallowed other people to hear what the message was and so forth, that was really ignorant. And so, just over the years anyway, the word itself, I just don't use it because, again, of the implications. Because we're trying to get away from this patriarchal leaning, with the divine feminine and some of the things that are coming in. So, be careful, folks, of the words you use. And so, I know that might be just a little bit.
So what you're saying is it's reinforcing. When we use the word patriot, it's
Yeah.
actually just reinforcing in the spirit, the I guess you would say the plasma realm or the etheric realm. It's
Uh-huh.
reinforcing that dominance.
It could be. It could be because, again, the words you use create the logic that you operate with. And so that's why I just personally don't use that word.
Very good.
Now, there are other words you can use, I mean, it's a fairly common word, a very popular word in some circles and so forth. But, just be careful. Just be careful. If you do use that particular word, put it into a context that does not, skew the conversation, because we're trying to get away from this patriarchal thought process and so forth. And, if you keep using the same words, you're in danger of conveying a message, that might not be, the very message that you would like to put across. So enough of that. What I wanted to do today a little bit, we had talked about last week about some of the history, way back, centuries and centuries and centuries ago, about what had brought us to our present dilemma. And this is a very serious problem. And so today I thought we would discuss a little bit more about mortgages, and then start to discuss perhaps some remedies. Now, as solutions in commerce, certainly since 2008, when the mortgage bubble popped, this is one of the subjects that we've intensified our research and our, I mean, so many people were and are still being affected that, and this is a broad subject. So today we'll just discuss a few of the things so that people would correctly understand what it is they're dealing with. And like I say, there's, what is it, 50 ways to leave your lover. Well, there's 50 ways to kill a mortgage too. And so we'll suggest a few today, and there's many others. I will recommend that, for those who would like to continue the battle against the death pledge, certainly, some of the suggestions I'll make today might be helpful. And for those, with solutions in commerce, I also do, private consultations. And so, if you get into a situation where you think that what I have to say or what I have to suggest may be helpful, you can call the number on the website and talk to the lady there at the office to arrange things. And like I say, we don't win everything. Win, lose, or draw. But at the very least, in some situations, and again, it doesn't depend on my ability. It depends on the ability of the party who's doing it, because I don't do things for people. I'll teach, I'll assist, and I'll critique what they're doing, but I won't do it for people. Uh, but if you get into a situation or position where you think a little bit of extra information may be helpful, please call the office, make an arrangement, and then we can have what we call, a private consultation, one-on-one phone conversation, that kind of thing. Because, like I say, a lot of people, would profit by just a little bit of coaching in some of the things they're doing. Hopefully, if you get into that situation, you would make some effort already. And so as we go along here today, I want to re-expose, some of that and talk about it. So let me just start out by screen sharing a little deal that I put together. Uh,
It almost seems like you have to talk about bankruptcy when you talk about mortgages too, because so many people end up in bankruptcy with when dealing with mortgages. It almost seems,
sometimes
yeah.
that's one of the stalling techniques sometimes we use.
Hmm.
All right, now what I'm showing here is a typical mortgage contract, and it's actually a two-tiered contract, or what's known as a statute staple. Now, the reason that they have formulated these mortgage contracts in this manner, technically it's a private contract, and it's a self-contained contract because it contains its own statute, it contains its own law. So a mortgage contract would best be looked at as a private contract called a statute staple. Now, as I had mentioned, it's a two-tiered type of contract. Now, and so the top element, if you want to call it that, is just basically, a simple contract. Pay $100 the first of every month. Now, that's pretty straightforward and everything. But what people don't see is the underlying portion, which we would call complex contract, in as much as there's what's known as recognizance and confession. So the recognizance part of it is actually identifying the secured portion of the contract. In other words, it'll describe, the house or the location, and it'll describe the property, that secures the contract, which would be the house, the home. And then the next portion of the bottom layer of the complex contract would be confession, which basically says, something to the effect, if I don't pay $100 the first of every month, then I give leave to the bank or whoever to come and seize the property. So again, the mortgage contract is a private contract. It does not legally depend upon other statutes. For instance, your state, federal statutes and so forth, because it has its own law within it, and there's where the difficulty lies. So people should just recognize that they're dealing with a private contract, which has several elements in it, and the main one is the bottom portion, the complex part of it, with recognizance and confession. Do you have any questions right off the top about a statute staple?
Yeah, I want to ask you about confession. And
Hmm.
so, since I guess they have standards for this, or can it be uniquely generated? And what is the standard when it comes to defaulting? I guess you're saying the confession part is talking about if you default on payments, what will happen?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah. And
so
so the confession is your agreement that if you don't pay $100 on the first of every month, that the bank has the right to come and seize the property. So it's a statute staple. And so the way the whole thing is written and performed as a private contract, I think people, don't realize what they're getting into. And we'll discuss that just in a moment,
okay,
some of the details of all that. But I just wanted to show people a typical statute staple.
okay,
It's a historical document. I mean, you remember last week we had talked about the Shatar and all those kinds, and we're going to review a little bit of that here in a minute. But I just wanted to show you the structure
mm,
and
okay,
how it is you get into trouble because you've already agreed in the contract. If you don't pay $100 on the first of every month, they can come get the house. You already agreed to it.
all right,
So the mortgage contract itself, has elements within it that would lead to the problems and so forth. But I'm just trying to show this so people would understand the nature and the structure of the contract they're getting into when they do a mortgage.
okay,
Because when we start to talk about debt, there's two types of debt that we refer to. One is unsecured debt, like a credit card or something
mm,
like that. The other one is a secured debt. In other words, collateral is put up to guarantee performance on the contract. In this case, it would be the house. Sometimes people get into, secured contracts with,
mm,
automobile loans or, things like that, where the default would lead to a seizure of real property.
okay. Yeah, car loans
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
not
Anything
credit.
secured.
What was my question? Oh, and maybe one day we'll go over the marriage contract and what that really means too,
Well,
but
that,
not
that,
today.
yeah, that's secured by children. And also it's secured by any product that comes from the union, such as joint bank accounts, joint whatever, blah blah blah. So yeah, the marriage contract itself is in the nature of a statute staple.
One day we'll talk about that because I think people don't realize it's a three-party contract. Most people don't know it's a three-party contract until
Yeah,
it's too late. So they're already in.
yeah, we've been fooled with a lot of that. Anyway, I just wanted to show that right off the top because
Okay.
we might have reference back to it again. But again, my point is it's a private contract
Okay.
and it contains its own law within it. Now, I mean, we do the same things. I mean, I've created plenty of statute staple contracts.
Hmm. And they're all enforceable, even if they're.
It's a private contract. Yes, it is enforceable in the public courts.
Mhm.
See, again, people don't get this. The public courts are in place to enforce private contract. That's what they do. And so, knowing that, then we get others into private contract. And when they default on the private contract, then we take it into the public court for execution.
Yeah, but if we're a corporate entity when we come in, then we can't, a corporation can't have a private, can a corporation have a private contract or have a private?
I can get a corporation into a private contract. Yes, I can.
Okay, all right. So that's why when we go into court and we're all capital letters, we're our corporate name, we're that straw man name. We're not our
Well,
live hand.
that's not the way I would write a court case, but typically that's what people see. But no, when I write a court case, it would appear just a little bit different.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. Because I'm just wondering how that interacts. I still think, Winston, after all these reports, I'm still trying to understand the whole. all the different ways of that we interact on a public and private, you know, level. I'm a slow learner, but I mean, I understand the concepts. It's just I'm not always consciously aware that it's private or public. Sometimes there's a little gray. Sometimes I know, but I mean, sometimes it's a little bit gray.
Well, yeah, but again, after everything's said and done, the private and the public have to interrelate in order to
Right.
get things going. Like I say, years ago, uh, we had different jurisdictions, and so it all depended on what kind of money was being used, and so we use the word commerce to refer to the king's business, his money, the king's money.
Right. Mm.
And then we had the merchant end of it, which dealt with trade. Now, trade might just involve exchange of goods and have nothing to do with money. And so the king would have his court, and the merchants would have their court. And so you might look at the king's court like a public court, and you might look at the merchant's court like a private court. But then when the merchants began to use the king's money, now the jurisdiction of the private merchant court shifted to the public king's court. And so again, at this age, as we've evolved down into our present time, because we are using the king's money.
Right. That's why you wrote that article on the two-tier money system, right?
Oh, yeah, that's
About
part
that.
of it.
Okay.
But because we use the king's money in our transactions and so forth, everything reverts to commerce, to the king's public courts. So that's how we got involved with that. Now, if you want to do private negotiations, for instance, exchange, if you wanted to do, for instance, if you wanted to use silver coins or gold coins, or if you wanted to use postage stamps or postal money orders and all the kind of things, you could keep it within the jurisdiction of the private. But just as soon as you start to use public money, then you're in commerce. You're in the king's court. Which, I mean, once you learn how to operate within that system, then you can still get the results and remedies you're looking for. And
Okay.
so that's as Solutions in Commerce over the years, that's what we've tried to demonstrate to people, is how to operate in the king's court with commercial remedies. So we haven't spent a whole lot of time on the private side so much as we have trying to resolve problems that occur in the private, how to adequately prepare to go to the king's court. That's what we've tried to do. So I think people, if they can kind of get that thought process in their thinking, that it would be very, very, very helpful.
No, it's a good way. It helps us understand really kind of how we slipped into this. And I think most of us don't know. I mean, I'm sure my parents didn't know, so they
No.
couldn't teach me, and there were no alternatives.
Yeah, the key to going from the private into the public is to exhaust private administrative remedy. Exhaust, which means there is nothing left to do. So you would go to the king for grace.
Remedy. Oh,
Grace.
grace to the king for grace.
After all that you can do. So on the private side, we talk about the exhaustion of administrative due process. And if you have exhausted and there's nothing left to do, then you're entitled to an equitable judgment, which we, in the scriptural words, we call grace. You remember how we spent so much time on that?
Yes.
So again, in your private dealings and so forth, you need to exhaust your administrative due process because once you have done that, that means you have done all that you can do to resolve the problem.
Right.
And so if you have exhausted, then you go to the king, the king's court, the public court, and you only have one question. And this is where people get so mixed, so balled up. They go into court with every kind of argument, which demonstrates you haven't exhausted. You haven't exhausted. You're not entitled to grace. So you go into the public courts and you start all kinds of arguments. Now, so if you have exhausted your administrative due process on the private side, then you're looking for a public remedy from the king's court. There's only one question when you go to court. Having given all the evidence and shown everything that you've done to resolve the problem, there's only one question. And people, if you can just learn this one thing, folks, and that is, there's only one question, and that question is, Your Honor, have I exhausted administrative due process? Now that's a yes or no question. So the judge has to answer your question. If he looks at all the things you've done, the administrative process and everything you've done, and he finds that you have exhausted, then the answer to that question is yes. And if the answer comes yes, then you're entitled to execution. That's what you're going for. Now, if he looks at what you've done and says, no, you have not exhausted, then you have another question, which is, please point out the defect. So he might point out something, say, well, this or that, you didn't do this, or, whatever. So you go and correct it. Then you come back to court, and then you ask the same question. Your Honor, have I exhausted my administrative due process? And when he says yes, there you go. Now you're off to the races. See, that's where people get, you don't go into court to prove anything. The only thing you're trying to find out that, have I done everything that I can do so I can be entitled to equity and grace? That's the only question. And this is the same thing when we, people, pray to God, and ask about this or complain about that and this, that, and the other. And so when you pray about a situation, about a problem, you would ask God, have I done everything that I can possibly do to resolve this problem? If God says, yes, you have, then what are you entitled to?
Grace, of course.
Yeah. But if you haven't, be careful because, we should not pray for things that would be to our detriment. And so God lets us try to work things out as best we can. And usually we can. Like for instance, on health issues. And so, we get sick, please God, make me well and all this kind of stuff. And the question comes back, well, yeah, what have you done to resolve the problem? And if you've done nothing, to cure or to heal and all those kind of things, why in the world would you dump it in God's lap? It don't make any sense. And so, God is interested in our progress, our abilities, and so forth. So it might be a health issue, it might be a social issue, it may be a dispute with family members or whatever. But if you have not done all that you can do to resolve that problem, I would be real careful about trying to get God to, and come paint your house and mow your lawn. He ain't gonna do it. You see what I mean? Now that sounds a little silly, but it's exactly right. We don't expect God or the courts to do something for us that we should and ought to do for ourselves.
Well, you know what, Winston, it's kind of the same analogy when you have like a family member or a friend or somebody who's always in trouble and asking you for money. and you know that you're giving them advice and they won't take the advice and they keep making the same mistakes, and every time you give them the money that it's not going to be well spent, but they're in dire straits, you got to help them out, you give them the money, whatever. And then you just get to this point where you realize that they're not really figuring it out. They're not really figuring out what they need to help themselves.
Well,
And then it's kind of like they're not going there because the problem is when you keep enabling people, they never will get into a situation where they have to find out for themselves how they can get themselves
yeah.
out of the situation.
It's
So
like somebody, that got sick from eating a rotten apple. They say, I ate a rotten apple, I have a tummy ache, and so you give them another rotten apple. You haven't fixed the tummy ache, have you? But anyway,
exactly.
let's not get into
No.
that. We
Yeah.
need to move along a little bit here. So
Yeah. Okay.
let's okay, you ready? All right, this is a little article we shared last time. The key word we're looking here is at the word mort main, because we had talked the other day about death pledge, that a mortgage is a pledge of death. And then we looked at this word mort main, which has two syllables. The first syllable being mort, that refers to death.
Mhm.
Anyway, this law of mort main again, just in reference, I'll just refresh people's memory that what was happening in the kingdom was that people were pledging or turning over property to the church, for forgiveness of sins.
Mm.
And so it's one thing to go and pay money for for your sins, as you suppose. But it's another thing, the king's reasoning was people were giving away property of the kingdom to the Vatican. And he would not favor that, because literally the Vatican would take up all the land. So he passed this law, which is basically called mort main, or death pledge. And so he was just saying, hey, you're not going to be deeding over property to the church for your sins. Number one, stop sinning. And number two, you're not going to give away the property of the kingdom to the Vatican, because, again, the Vatican was a foreign agent. And they did not have the interest of the kingdom in mind. So the king was just saying, hey, no more of that. So I just wanted to refresh people's memory just a little bit there on that. And then let's look at,
Well, isn't that how the Vatican became really kind of one of
that
the,
was part of it.
yeah, very wealthy
And then,
landowner?
yeah, and then again, we had reference last time to this article that appeared in the Georgetown Law Journal way back. I don't know what year it was, a long time ago. But anyway, it went through, some elements of the evolution. You remember that when William the Conqueror came to England, as it were, he brought with him on purpose uh, Jews who had perfected a commercial system. And so, just like how the Vatican was trying to take up land, the Jews were using their system of lending against a secured debt. Then William the Conqueror hoped to take away the power of the landholders, and also the knights, because the knights were tied to the land.
Hmm.
So that was an element. So I just wanted to go back and refresh people's memory. You can go back and listen to the previous report, to get some of the uh, thought process. One of the key words here is Jewish gauge, which was a lien on all property. Again, mort gauge. It's a two-syllable word, mort gauge. The word gauge came from this concept of the shetar that was brought to England. I mean, they were already doing it at other places, don't get me wrong. When they brought it to England, the purpose of it was simply to gain control of the land. So it's one thing for William the Conqueror to come in, and say, hey, we just beat up your army. Now I'm the head guy in charge and stuff. But then you still had all these landholders, and the power and the wealth was in the land.
Hmm.
And so, William realized that. And so that's why he instituted this particular system into the thought process, so he could simply take control of the land and the knights. Now, some of the knights got pretty upset about that because, they had an allegiance to a particular individual, and then all of a sudden, some moneylender shows up and says, "I'm the new tenant. Now you have allegiance to me." And knights weren't real happy about that.
Mm.
So it got to be, I don't know what all the different things, but again, just, if people want to go and review this article, like I say, you can find it on the internet. No big deal.
The title of it is The Shittar's Effect on English Law. Okay.
Yeah. And see, the problem was, as will be pointed out in another article I want to refer to here, is that when the founding fathers, as we call them, decided to adopt English common law, this same BS came with it.
Hmm.
Now, like I say, in the earliest of times, they had a choice between English common law and Anglo-Saxon common law, and they chose English common law.
Hmm.
But when they did that, they brought this same system right into this new country. Now, how smart was that? I mean, it wasn't altogether that smart, because look what's happened because of it. Because again, they brought mortgage
Mm-hmm.
onto North America. Now, I mean, in historical retrospect, that was just plumb stupid. Just plumb stupid. Anyway, that's what happened, and so now we, here all these, 200 and some odd years later, are still having to deal with it. And that's why we have to have a change. That's why we have to have Nasara. That's why we have to have all these things to happen.
Mm.
Because again, everybody run around, like I say, a lot of times, I pull my hair out when people keep running around crying and screaming for common law, common law, common law.
Mm-mm.
Well, you going to bring the mortgage right with it, just like the founding fathers did? Look at the problems. People need to stop and take a look at what they're saying. Just like I said, I don't use that word patriot because look what the word is. And so when you start to talk about restoration of common law, are we going to go back to English common law? Better not.
No.
That's why I say we can't drag this old stuff back with us. Now, there are principles within the common law that do comply with God's law or natural law. Certainly those things we would want to incorporate in our new system and so forth. But we're not dragging this mortgage stuff into the new system, folks. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. So get that out of your thought process. Anyway, this is just one of the articles that we shared last time that people might, study, to get a pretty good idea about how things are. So let's move right along here. I kind of have numbers so I can keep a little bit better track of them.
Well, it makes it very clear. I mean, we can understand how we can see how we got into this. I don't know why anybody, if you understand this as they're listening to how you explain this, we understand then how we get into the crisis.
Well, I wasn't a history major in college, but I see the importance of history and knowing what happened so that we can say, okay, do we want that now again or not? And if we look at history and say, hey, we made a mistake back then, we just don't do it again. Stop it. Don't do it again. It's like that old story. I love this story. I tell it a lot of seminars. My wife said, will you please stop using the same old jokes? You're wearing people out with it. But, the joke was, I went to the doctor and I said, Doc, every time I do this, it hurts. The doctor said, well, don't do that anymore.
Don't do it anymore.
It's just an old joke, but it's ever so true. And so, if we've had history, where we're doing this, it's caused us problems. Well, don't it make sense? Don't do that no more. And so, but if you don't understand history,
Mm.
then you won't see those things. And so that's what, a lot of our reviews and reports and stuff like that, you can see how much history I brought forward.
Oh, yeah, it's almost all history. It's all historical.
Yeah, you really have to look at it because, like I say, if we're going into a new paradigm, we're going to take the good things with us, but the bad stuff we're going to leave behind. It's bad karma. We're going to leave it. Ain't going to happen. Now, this next article here was written, obviously, by some Christians because they want to quote all these scriptures and so forth, which is good. For instance, it says, what is the meaning and origin of the word mortgage? The term mortgage or mortgage comes from mort, which means death, and gage, which means pledge. Mortgage means a dead pledge. In Bovier's Law Dictionary in 1856, death pledge is defined as a mortgage of land and goods. It's a pledge of death because it's an engagement in debt, which is a neglect or violation of our duty. We're not supposed to engage in those things. And then he goes through the various scriptures, Christian scriptures, which warn against that. And so, like I say, there's a great number of scriptures that you can refer to. And then get into some private fundamentals of business law that came from 1950. He's talking about the Hanseatic League and how they did it. And you can study some of that history of the Hanseatic League in that one article, I've referred to, Dispatch of Merchants by Bill Avery. He goes into a lot of that history to show that. Anyway, the merchants of the Italian city-states and the cities were members of the Hanseatic League, rejuvenated general European trade in the 12th and 13th centuries, following its almost total abandonment after the fall of Rome. These traders took precepts from the ancient law of the Roman Empire, adapted them to their times, and created customs of trade and ways of doing business that became accepted among the merchants of all Europe. And hence this body of business or commercial law obtained the name law merchant. Now, if you'll look at some of the modern definitions, especially in Black's Law Dictionary and everything, it'll show you that if you use the king's money, you are considered a law merchant and must comply with law merchant law. And that's where people get into some, if you just know the definitions to a lot of things, that would be ever important. It says the law of agency, sales, negotiable instruments, insurance, carriage, debt, guarantees, offage, and transit, liens, partnerships, and bankruptcy was made by these traveling international private merchants. And then this article, he goes through to show, the author, it may have been a he, it may have been a she, I don't know. But anyway, then it goes through why the concept of mortgage does not comply with the law that's contained in the scriptures. Quoting Exodus, Deuteronomy, and all kinds of things. And then he refers to this Georgetown Law Journal that we just showed right here, and it goes through, what we had talked about a little bit. Talks about the Shatar, the mortgage, some of those things. So it's a real good article, certainly for those who are Bible believers and so forth. This gives credibility to the concept of don't do that no more. So anyway, we can make these articles available to people if they care to have them. But then we get into this one here. So what we see from the above is that the non-Jews picked up the ways of the Jews and became one with them in their Babylonian Talmud, because this system of the Shatar and these things originated in the Talmud, not Torah.
Yeah,
In
Talmud's.
Talmud. So we're not talking strictly about the Jews. We're talking about the spirit of Antichrist, which is promoted and enlarged by the kings and merchants of the earth. See, what had happened was that after William the Conqueror, the next guy, I think his name was Edward or something like that, he kind of got tired of the Jews, and then he run them right out of the country. He said, leave or we'll put you in jail or whatever. And so they left, but it was the statutes of merchants. What he did was he allowed uh, the merchants in the kingdom to adapt the same process. So that was known as the statute of merchants. In 1285, Edward extended to creditors the forms of registry, remedy, and enforcement that had previously been the substance of the exchequer of the Jews. Under the statute, a debtor acknowledged the existence of his debt before the mayor and one of his recording clerks. The clerks recorded the debt in two rolls, one to remain. Well, blah, blah, talk about the procedure of it. But what he's saying is, this author here, he's going historically and saying, okay, Edward cast the Jews out of England, but then in the statute of merchants, he allowed the English money lenders to do the exact same thing. So what was accomplished by running the Jews out of England?
Nothing.
They just went and copied the same crap they were doing.
But did he understand he was doing that, or
well, of course he did.
He did. Okay.
Of course he did.
He said, "Oh, this is a good system, but I want it to control it for myself. So I'm going to kick you out, and I'm going to control it all."
Yeah. So 5 years after the statute of merchants, Edward I expelled the Jews from England. Religious hostility was rife. They go on about, some of the things, again, talking about debts were secured by land. Now, again, we're getting into some of the basic concepts of Uniform Commercial Code as we have it today. See, the Uniform Commercial Code is an evolution of, common law. And so this statute of merchants, became a part of their common law, which we imported. And then when you start to talk about the evolution of negotiable instrument law and some of these kind of things, all of a sudden we've come up with Uniform Commercial Code, which was written by attorneys, and so you can imagine what the impact and influence was intended. Now, can we use Uniform Commercial Code to our advantage in these merchant courts? So yeah, we can, and we do all the time. And so over the years, we've with Solutions in Commerce, we've suggested or shown different things that would be very helpful to secure some property and different things by using the Uniform Commercial Code Form 1, which is known as a financing statement. And so if you want to operate in that system, not be a victim of it, then what I've shown over the years is how to become unvictimized. And so, and when we get a chance here in a minute, I want to make sure I have time to bring this up. In regards to mortgages, we can use the Uniform Commercial Code in Article 3, Sections 305 and 306 as a recoupment. And so I'll show that, toward the end, that, some of the remedies and stuff that we've developed that might help people out. So anyway, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. It says the ways of the Babylonian Talmud. Mortgage practices became part of the common law of England. The law of merchants of the earth in England were merged with the common law of England, which up to that time contained only biblical law. So today the term common law includes the law of merchant. The merger took place in England in the 1600s through a court decision by Lord Mansfield and was then brought to America and incorporated into the federal state constitutions. That is, the common law of England shall rule in all cases of law and equity. See, we just brought that same BS when we adopted English common law. Was that through ignorance or stupidity, or was it on purpose? I don't know. But when we start to look at the true history, everybody just, runs around waving flags, and singing national anthems, doing all kinds of things. without taking a close look at, what our history has been. So let's see. Again, this article again was written by someone who's very much a Bible scholar. They bring in a lot of the scriptures and so forth to demonstrate their position. Okay, any questions about any of that?
No, but you can see how easily adapted it was because when you're using these scriptures, to kind of support what you're doing, it's like you don't question it.
Well, again, they're quoting King James,
Mhm.
and which is okay. I got no problem with that because I don't look at so much, the source. I look at what it says, and so I judge what's said in my heart, and that is if something out of King James resonates with my heart, then I know that's true. If something out of some other Geneva Bible or apocryphal works or whatever, I'm not going to judge something by what book it came out of or who said it. I'll judge it according to how it resonates in my heart to determine whether it's true or not. If it's true, I don't care where it came from. You know,
Mm.
every once in a while, Winston says something that's true. Now, don't I?
Yeah.
Every once in a while.
And it always resonates with us. We're like constantly resonating even after the Goldfish report closes, is resonating in our energy field like a bell.
Yeah, yeah.
The problem
Well,
is
let's
it
see.
does resonate. What you used to talk about resonates, and then we all kind of feel like, I don't know, sometimes I feel pretty stupid because, it was right in front of us and we didn't see it. And I know
Yeah.
you're not trying to make us feel that way by any means.
No.
You're trying to enlighten us, if anything. And so, but, once we see it spelt out in front of us, boy, we all feel like we've been hoodwinked a little.
Yeah, one of these here.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly. Exactly. But
yeah.
it's a study though, as I say almost in every country roads that we do. It's a study. This is a study. This material is something to study and really make sure you understand. And it's good to do it in a group of people so that you can get a consensus on your interpretation of what's going on there. Or you could just watch Winston.
Well, I've had a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot of, but I have had experiences with mortgages in the past. One of them I was actually able to pay off, the other one I didn't.
Hmm.
And so that one I played with, I learned ever so much. I
Mm.
learned ever so much. And so that was the genesis of the basis, of some of the technology and thought process I've been able to develop, since that time. And so, like I say, people say, well, you know, uh, I'm in a mortgage foreclosure. I lost the house. Yeah, I've lost one too.
Mm.
I've lost one too, and that caused me to do a little bit more research and so forth into the situation. So, because of that, I'm probably more apt to be able to explain some of these situations than someone who had never experienced it or who is going through it for the first time today. I talked to a fellow one time. He was a kind of a wheeler and dealer kind of a guy, But he said he had lost 6 properties before he finally figured it out.
Oh.
Then once he figured it out, then he was very successful.
Mm.
So again, it's a lot of times it's trial and error. There's no book, that you can study in college to figure these things out. And so what we've done over the years is basically like walking through a minefield.
Hmm.
And that is, we start walking, and if we take a few steps and nothing blows up, then we feel pretty good. But then if we take another step and something blows up, then we say, well, don't go that way again. And so what we've tried to do, not just me, but many people, what we've tried to do is to create a path, through that minefield so that people can negotiate their way through it and come out successfully on the other end without, losing a leg or an arm. That's what we're trying to do. And so again, a lot of this information and knowledge simply comes by trial and error and experience.
Here
And
we go.
so, yeah. And because the situations present so many variables, people keep asking me, well, Winston, can't you, write a 10-step process to deal with a mortgage. No, I can't. It's not a 10-step because all the variables that keep coming up. I mean, you're going to go in all kinds of directions depending on what your situation is. So
Okay.
what we tried to do is create, basic concepts for understanding and then basic strategies to deal with some of those things. Now, you mentioned bankruptcy a minute ago. Yeah, that's one of the strategies from time to time that we use as a delay tactic
Mm.
to prevent a foreclosure so that people have a little bit more time to figure out, can they do something about it. So, like I say, a lot of times, win, lose, or draw. Win, lose, or draw, we're trying to empower people to take control of their own life and not be set upon by robbers and bandits. That's what we're trying to do.
Mm.
And then again, depending on your level of proficiency, and a lot of it has to do in court.
Mm.
And so again, depending on your proficiency in some of those arenas and so forth, might in fact, determine whether you're successful or that eventually you have failures. So again, I would recommend to people to, if you're anticipating, then you might in fact want to get that single topic DVD on civil court. People will call me and say, well, Winston, we have this or that going on. I said, well, you're going to have to go to court to settle that. And so, again, when people say, well, I've never been to court, I don't know what to do. And so, again, if you get that DVD on the civil court, and then we did another presentation with me and another individual who's very, very successful in court. It's called a new look, or oh man, I'm going to have to go back and look at my old website to remember it. But it was a recording that Spencer and I had done, and Spencer lines it out, how he has been successful in court. Now he don't always win, but I think it's called a new look at foundations or fundamentals or something like that.
Mm. I know who that is that you're talking about,
Uh-huh.
by the way. And I'll tell you about it later.
Well,
Yeah.
like I say, there's some things, some things that people can do and some things that
Yeah.
people can't do. And so,
Yeah.
but anyway, to those who are novices, with civil court, then I would certainly suggest the DVD on civil court, and then this other, where we go through, a lot of the experiences we've had in court and how we handled it and how it worked out. So again, you're going into a Babylonian court, the guy sitting up front with the robe of Saturn, sitting there with that black outfit on. Yeah, that's what he is. He's a priest of Baal. And so you just have to know going in what you're dealing with. And so you better have your ducks in a row when you get in there. And most people, who lack experience, I mean, even in traffic court, yeah, people, they get into traffic court and they're just amazed at what goes on. They're just amazed.
Yeah. No, I mean, like you said in a previous Country Roads, the court system is not there for justice.
No, it's a moneymaker. And even in traffic court, you'll see that the guy sitting up front is wearing the robe of Saturn. That's what that is. And he is there in the capacity of a priest of Baal, the false god that was talked about in the Old Testament. So going in, you just have to understand what it is you're looking at when you get in there. And so, as a help to people, then we try to prepare them like traffic court. I mean, put out a single topic DVD on traffic tickets. And in there, I go through about 3 or 4 good strategies that could be used to overcome, some of those problems. And, like I said, the first time I went into a traffic court, after it was all over with, the judge literally put his head down, the priest of bail literally put his head down on his desk like this and said, "This has been the worst day of my life." I didn't do anything mean or anything.
Winston's laughing about that.
It was
Get some
funny.
satisfaction with it.
And then the next time I got a traffic ticket, I had a hard time getting it. First off, they just wouldn't give me one in that town.
They wouldn't give me one.
Huh?
I'm sorry, it sounds funny when you said that. They wouldn't give me one. It's like
No, they wouldn't. I mean, I get pulled over all the time because I just drove old pickup trucks and stuff. Always a light out or something wrong with them. So they stopped me and they found out who it was. They wouldn't give me a ticket. So this one morning, I finally insulted the guy bad enough that he finally gave me a ticket. I said, oh boy, here we go. It took me 5 months to schedule a hearing on that ticket. They didn't want me in there again.
It's pretty funny.
So on that occasion.
And then what happened? You got to tell us what happened.
Yeah, I went in there, man. Cause traffic court. I just want to try out a whole bunch of stuff, that I've been studying on. So I went in there, and the same judge, same fella.
Oh no!
I liked him okay. I mean, I didn't have nothing against him.
Yeah.
I liked him okay. And so I went in there, and the first thing he said was, he said a year ago, he said I had a quadruple bypass. And said that 2 or 3 months ago I had another, attack. So, he was trying to beg out of it. And so he said, if you'll just plead no contest, he said I'll make this thing go away. I said, dang it, man! I've been spending all this time studying and getting all this stuff together. I want to try out and everything, So I was sadly disappointed, that I couldn't, work my stuff. But anyway, I finally agreed. Anyway, I think if people want to learn how to deal with something that's basic in traffic court.
Sorry, it's just so funny. He's telling you about his heart surgeries. He's asking you for mercy. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Talk about turning tables. He's begging you for mercy. I love it.
Well, I hadn't done nothing to him. Like I say, the problem was that he had a conscience. And so when I would project truth, it would work on his conscience. And so he was in a dilemma between his conscience and what his job description was. That it wasn't me. It was his dilemma between his conscience and his job description. And so that was what was causing it wasn't me. It was him. I just, when I come in, when I come into something like that, I'm just a little bit different, maybe than other people who might wander into something like that. And so that was what was happening. It wasn't me.
So
it was him.
It was him. Just a little bit different.
No, well, yeah.
That's pretty good. You have the judge begging you for mercy. I love it. So I'm looking at this document that you have screen shared up here.
Yeah, let's look at this
it's
for a
very
minute.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a real good article.
Yeah.
Maybe I should send you all these things in case anybody asked about them.
Yeah, that would be good.
This is going into truth in lending, or what we call TILA under Regulation Z, in regards to mortgages. It says you couldn't use Regulation Z at the start, but what he says here, they do not disclose the right to rescind at closing under Appendix H. Now, people don't know this, but you have 3 days after you sign a mortgage to rescind your signature off the mortgage. But they don't tell you that. But it is a part of TILA, Truth in Lending Act, and So technically what happens is because of their failure to tell you that, it's fraud by omission. And we've used that a lot.
Well, some do tell you. I used to work in a post-closing department in a mortgage for a mortgage company,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a document that was right to rescind. You had to sign that. They had to
Uh-huh.
wait 3 days. We had to wait 3 days to do the post-closing because to finish the documents for post-closing because
Yeah.
you had to wait that 3-day period. So some know, some do it. It's not everybody though, I guess.
Okay. But
Mhm.
they never give the proper notice to close, or let me go further. So one could rescind every mortgage contract at foreclosure. They give this option because one could have registered the note on the UCC one. One would be the creditor anyway, and so they can't foreclose.
Okay.
A rescission completely discharges the security agreement, which is the mortgage deed and mortgage contract. One could ask for the entire amount of the mortgage note returned in the form of cash. Now, we're going to talk about that under UCC 3, 305, and 306 here at the very last. So I'm just kind of building up. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Now, when these transactions are deconstructed, a horrible nexus of fraud becomes apparent. Once upon a time, the borrower sat down at the closing table. The borrower did not own the property when he sat down at the table. Yet, all of a sudden, he miraculously, so this guy is being sarcastic here. This is what he said. Yet, all of a sudden, he miraculously owns the property free of all encumbrances. Otherwise, how could he mortgage it?
Own the property when he sat down.
Y'all fix there?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Just been
All
sliding.
right, so he's being sarcastic in his comments, but it's the tact and the mind control that's going on, in these situations. So what he's saying is that, okay, well, if he sits down and the bank will allow him to mortgage property, that would have to mean what? That he's the owner of it, or else how could they allow him to mortgage it? I mean, can I mortgage something that's not mine? No.
Hmm.
And so it's obvious then if the bank is allowing somebody to enter into a mortgage contract, and they recognize that party as being the owner of the property. So you have to think what your true position is in these kinds of negotiations and so
Ah,
forth.
interesting.
Yeah. And so anyway, he goes into some of the thought process behind that.
Mhm.
Uh, then he said, but this begs a very obvious question. If the borrower already owns the property, why does he need the mortgage? Unless he's borrowing money to be used for some other private purpose. If he uses the property as collateral for the loan, when does he receive the money? Has the borrower or any party involved ever received the money from the mortgagee? No, but it's there.
Well,
In his account.
the presumption there. Let's go back to the presumption for a minute that you're the
Okay.
owner.
You
Um,
mean assumption or presumption? Let's just say, okay, go ahead. No, I didn't want to pick at your words. Go ahead.
well, I guess what I'm going back to this document where the document did they say they didn't say he says if the borrower already owns the property. Well, we didn't. Did we? How did we establish that?
Well, it's logic. If the bank is going to allow you to mortgage a property, then he must recognize you as the owner. That's the logic.
Okay. And to back that up, we have to back that up, but we have
And
to still back that
then
up, though.
if you want to rescind your signature within 3 days under TELA, you can do that. Or you can actually rescind your I wouldn't say rescind, I would say revoke.
Hmm.
That's the proper word. But you could revoke your signature at any point once you discover the fraud. So let's say, you get into all this contract and all these kind of things, and somewhere down the road you're listening to some kind of an interview by Winston and Louisa, and you say, oh, that makes sense to me. Once you discover the fraud, you could go and revoke your signature from the mortgage contract at that proper time. Or the application for a marriage. Once you discover the fraud, See, there is no statute of limitations on fraud. Once you discover there's been fraud in the contract, you can revoke your signature at that time. So the 3 days on that document you were talking about.
Okay.
Now, so let's say you go through the whole thing, you sign that document you were talking about, then you wait 3 days, the bank waits 3 days to do this, that, and the other, and then somewhere down the road, some guy who listens to some of these interviews and everything and says, hey, I just found out what they did with my note.
Mm.
And they're holding money and they're writing checks on an account they created without my permission. Is that fraud?
The straw
Yeah.
account, the straw man account.
No, not on the straw man account. Okay, they take the note, they make a special deposit in the bank, they create an account with your name on it, and they write a check to the seller to clear the seller's mortgage.
Right.
All right. Now, have you ever seen that account? Do they ever send you a statement of account on that account with your name on it?
No.
No, they never do. And so they're writing checks on an account that has your name on it. Is that fraud?
That sounds like fraud to
Yes.
me.
Yes, it is. And so
Sounds like fraud to me.
if you discovered that all of a sudden, could you go at that moment and revoke your signature from the mortgage contract? Yes.
Yes.
That's what this fellow here is trying to point out. All right, so let's move along here. I better just send this to you so that people can download it and read it, because we're going to run short on time again, like we always do. But anyway, it's a real good article. The guy gives you a good understanding about securitization and the special purpose vehicles and all that crap we were trying to solve, way back when. All right, so let's. It's a real good article. I'll send all these to you so if people inquire about it, or if you want to post them, I don't care. But people need to become knowledgeable. Okay. Let's see. All right. Now, let me point out one thing, and I want to show this. When a foreclosure starts, the bank or whoever will record. Listen, record, not file. They will record a notice of default. And that's how the whole thing starts. So when they record the notice of default, then you have 90 days to do something about the default. Because after 90 days, the default turns into a security. 90 plus 1 days equals security, because it's an account receivable, which is in default. 90 plus 1 days, the notice of default on the account receivable turns into a security, which they can sell or do whatever they want to with it. All right. Now, so many people call me and say, well, Winston, we got this foreclosure and all this kind of stuff. And I say, okay, let's back up for a minute. Did the bank record a notice of default? Yeah, they did. I said, really? How long ago? It might vary. And I said, well, what did you do about that? And they said, nothing. I said, you let it run past 90 days. Yeah. Okay. Now we got a new problem.
Got it.
You see? So always rebut. Always rebut. Object. So here's an example. Let's say, for instance, the bank sends you a notice of default. Or they record it and send you a copy of it. And so you can go down to the recorders and you can look at it, because it'll be there. It'll be there. So you need to rebut the notice of default. And here is an example of how you might do that. I mean, you'd have to, put it into your, into your situation, your circumstances. But here's just a bare bones rebuttal for notice of default. So notice the rebuttal of notice of default. This is a rebuttal notice of default. File that, whatever county recorder's office file number such and such, in the nature of 5 USC 522A, which is Data Integrity Board hearing. The purpose under 5 USC 522A is to make sure that the public record conforms to the private record. Okay. So they put something into the record. Now we're putting something into the record. And if you rebut the notice of default, they can't keep going, folks.
Okay, so you want to say why? If you rebut it, if
Because
you
you
object.
rebutted it. Yeah. Yeah. And so they would have to come out with a new notice of default so they can proceed on. Say they put the notice of default in, they let it run 90 plus 1 days, and then the bank will come in and appoint a successor trustee on the.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is typically in deed of trust type states.
Okay.
In mortgage states, it's a little bit different. Actually, mortgage states are a whole lot easier than deed of trust states.
Okay.
Deal with mortgages because you're already in court. Now you can really rip them up if you understand how to operate in the courts.
Okay.
which we've tried to, get people to do, because the resolution to a private problem can be resolved in a public court. So you'll have to go into the public court. So if you're in a state that have judicial foreclosures, hey, you're right there. Those are the easiest to deal with. I mean, I've been dealing with a lady up in New York now, boy, and she is tearing them up. Oh, geez. I have so much fun talking to her. Because, like I say. But anyway, a majority of the states are what we call deed of trust states. It may call it something different there, but all you have to do to figure out whether it's a deed of trust type situation is just find out, are foreclosures handled judicially or administratively. See, the deed of trust concept was created by banks as a way to get around judicial foreclosure. So these deed of trust situations are administrative foreclosures. They're not judicial. Okay, so you have to do a little bit more work with the deed of trust situation. In any event, when they want to start a foreclosure process administratively, the first thing to do is put out and record a notice of default. All right, and so they send you a copy of it. So what do you do about it? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And so people typically don't do anything about it. Well, they call me up, way down the line. First thing I want to know about, I want to know about that notice of default, because you can stop it right there. You stop it right there using this thought process here. All right, so notice is hereby given by John H. Smith, hereinafter I, me, or myself, that ABC Bank is in fraud.
It says
in
it's
regard,
not.
Pardon me?
It says it's not in fraud. Oh,
It
is
says,
in fraud. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Never go ahead. Go ahead. The second sentence I
All
was
right.
looking at.
All right, so ABC Bank is in fraud in regards to deed of trust number such and such. Then we go into specific negative environment, like we
Okay.
talked about in the
Right.
past.
In the
There's not any
affidavit.
evidence that ABC Bank is not in fraud
Got it.
in regards to deed of trust number such and such, and I believe that not any such evidence exists, and ABC Bank interest in mortgage number such and such is void for fraud. There is not any evidence that ABC Bank interest in mortgage is not void for fraud. See, you have to get into the logic train of this
Right.
language here.
Got it.
And that, blah, blah, blah. Now, you'll notice here that when we do these kind of things, and for instance, the notice of default may have, 2 statements or 2 allegations, or it might have 10 allegations.
Okay.
However many it has, you have to specifically go and rebut each single allegation separately.
Okay.
So rebut each allegation and notice the default point for point.
Right. Like 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. If there's 10,
Yeah,
you list 10 and you go through each 10 that and you directly respond to each one, directly
absolutely.
respond to one. Number 2, what are they saying? Directly respond to that. Number 2.
Yeah, do
Number
not try
3.
to do an umbrella or a universal denial. Don't do that. Do each one of them separately. Now, certification. Again, this is in the form of an affidavit. Obviously, uh, I've read, do know the contents to be true, correct, blah blah blah. Signature, notary seal. There you go. That is a typical way to rebut a notice of default. Any questions? Because we need to move along.
Oh, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, that's the first thing to do, folks.
All right.
You
Got
know,
it.
if somebody comes along and makes an allegation and you don't do anything about it, then under the
Yeah.
law system that we're operating under, by acquiescence, you've agreed to it.
Tacit acquiescence, is that what it's called?
Tacit acquiescence.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, if you call me up and say, hey, I just now got a notice of default, I say, great, now we can cut it off right there at the start. If you call me up and say, hey, I got a notice of default, 6 months ago, now what do I do? So I'm start pounding myself on the head, say, well, why didn't you do something about it in the first instance? Because now we got to catch up.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so again, if you're involved in some kind of situation, they send you a notice of default. For crying out loud, folks, do something about it right from the start. Okay, well, let's move along here then. That's just a portion of it.
Right.
Now, let's see. We got so many things mixed in here. Well, let's talk about, again, we're talking about deed of trust situations. We don't have time to cover the whole gamut of mortgages and stuff. So let's talk about deed of trust. Now, when I first started to look at this situation with deed of trust, in my mind, I'm starting to say trust.
Right.
I know a little bit about trust and how they function. All right. Now, on the deed of trust, it will list you as the grantor. You're the you're the creator of the trust. That means, in regard to that trust, what is your position? You're God.
You're the grantor.
So you
Just do whatever
you
you want
get to say what happens with that trust. Now, the bank typically writes up the deed of trust, and you let them do it, and you go through the whole process and so forth. So the deed of trust is recorded. The deed of trust is there to guarantee the value of the note. So the deed of trust goes in, but it's a trust. Repeat. It's a trust, and you're the grantor. And you have let the bank write the trust, but as grantor, could you do something about that?
You can. You can
Oh,
appoint. You
yeah.
can appoint an executive administrator to the trust.
Not executive administrator. All right.
Trustee.
Now, if you have a trust indenture as grantor and you decide to change those indentures, could you change them?
Yes, you can
Oh,
change
of course you
anything as a
can.
grantor. Right.
As a grantor, you do anything you want to in that trust. Okay? Because this, of course, is a revocable trust. All right. So we're going to put in to the we're going to create an amendment to the deed of trust. In essence, we're going to change things. So in regards to a certain deed, go ahead.
I know what you're gonna do.
Yeah, you
You're
do.
gonna appoint a fiduciary, right?
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
in a way you might not suspect.
Okay. Okay.
Because if you look at a typical deed of trust, they have something in there called buyer and lender. That's not part of the trust. So first off, we're going to get rid of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So this is an amendment of deed of trust number such and such. Again, under 5 USC. Notice is hereby given to the following parties: to the title company, to MERS if you're involved in MERS, to the bank if you're involved with the bank or whatever. So you're given the notice of the following of the fraud of deed of trust number such and such. So you're telling, title company, MERS, if you're involved. I just heard they got some kind of new thing. Because, MERS got outlawed, so now they've come up with some new thing that's just like MERS.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing the same crap under a different name. Anyway, MERS or whatever this other crap organization is, or bank, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you're telling them that there's fraud. There's fraud on the deed of trust. So therefore, by order of John H. Smith, trustor and settlor of deed of trust number such and such, the above mentioned parties are hereby released without consideration for the fraud. Now, this term, released without consideration, what it basically means is, you're dismissed and you have no further liabilities in this matter. So basically, shut your mouth and leave. All right. Now we're going to install some new parties in this trust. So we're going to put in a trustee of our choosing. See, when the bank wrote that deed of trust, they put in their trustee, who typically is an attorney. Typically.
Oh.
Look on it.
Right, now I know. You don't want the attorney as the
Not the bank's attorney, no. What's he going to do for you? Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to get rid of them jerks, and we're going to put in a new trustee. So we're going to, have a friend or whoever, like, Bill Brown is going to be the new trustee. Now we're going to name a new beneficiary. Instead of the bank being the beneficiary, who's going to be the beneficiary on this one? John
You
Smith.
are.
Yeah, you are.
You are. Mm-hmm.
And who is going to be the lender?
We're not going to have a lender anymore.
Oh, yeah, you are. Because this might come up later. Who is the lender on this deed of trust? Listed on this deed of trust on the mortgage. Who's the lender?
Well, it would be the
person. The person that created the promissory note. You loan them the promissory note. Now, when we get into here just in a minute, if we speed up a little bit, I'm going to show you UCC 3-305 and 306.
Okay.
But you're the lender. The bank never lent a darn penny, did they?
No, that's why I was saying I knew we were the lender, so I didn't know why we would.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so termination. I mean, this is a bare bones. And so, like I say, this is a bare bones kind of thing. Okay. So, termination of trust indentures, all previous terms on deed of trust number such and such are hereby revoked as fraud. New indenture. Mm-hmm. The duty of the new trustee is to faithfully follow instructions of the trustor, John H. Smith. Compensation to the trustee will be by mutual agreement. Because, you got to pay a trustee. Mm-hmm. They don't do it for free.
Right.
So, give them a silver coin or a $1 postage stamp for all the difference it makes. But pay them. Pay him. Because I was called to be a trustee on something one time. The guy never paid me for it, so I never done anything. But okay, let's talk about the deed of trust. If you look at a typical deed of trust, and a lot of them are just pretty standard, along about line 19 or 20 or 21, somewhere in that area, it's going to say, if the trustee finds out that the lender has been satisfied, then it's the duty, in other words, if they satisfied the debt. Mm-hmm. So it's the duty of the trustee to do a full reconveyance. It says that right in your deed of trust. All right, so you got a new trustee in here, so all you got to do is go and show him evidence that you tendered a promissory note at the time of closing. So now what's the duty of the trustee of this deed of trust? To go do a full reconveyance of the deed to you. This is not rocket science. It's
You
common sense if you just
advance.
know a little bit about trust. So go read your deed of trust, and somewhere in there it's going to say that if the original lender has in fact been satisfied, and if they sold the stupid mortgage to somebody else, they got satisfied at least that way without your promissory note.
Yeah, they table fund it, where they sell it simultaneously as they close it. Then
Exactly.
a month later, you get a mortgage statement booklet, and it's got a completely different name on it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
at the very least, if you consider that the bank would be the original lender, which they're not,
Mm.
but if you consider that, but so if you tell the new trustee, look at all these things that have happened, here's the documentation to show it, then
Yeah.
what's the duty of the new trustee? To go and do a full reconveyance through the
Conveyance.
county recorder of that property back to you. Bingo.
But there's something called uh, okay, what is it called? Transfer, assimilation of transfer, or something like that.
Well, I don't care
Where
about all that, but that's all
laws.
I'm telling you, that the duty of the trustee on the
Mhm.
deed of trust
Okay.
is to do a full reconveyance once he's satisfied that the original lender has been satisfied. And
Okay.
it happened right there at
Right.
closing
Right. Right. Exactly. When they table
with,
fund it. Mhm.
without even thinking about the promissory note.
Right. Free.
See what I mean?
Hmm.
So anyway, this is a kind of a bare bones skeleton thing. If you're going to do this and you would want to, flesh it out, you know, but anyway, it's just a notice of correction on the deed of trust. That's all it
Okay.
is. And why can you do that? Because you're the grantor. You're the trustor. Okay.
Right. But they um, Simon of mortgage. I'm just trying to think of this. I used to notarize a Simon of
Okay.
mortgage.
Okay. I don't care about all that
Okay.
stuff.
Okay.
I don't want to get down that rabbit trail where all these idiots, are running around, doing this, that, and the other. I don't care what
Okay.
they do with it. The only thing I want to find out with the trustee, has the original lender been satisfied?
Right.
If they have been, then I want my reconveyance.
Right.
I don't care what else. I don't care what the idiots do,
Hmm.
wherever.
Can you
I
explain
really
what
don't
the
care.
reconveyance really means? What
It's
does it
right there. You
establish?
can you
What does
can
it
settle the
establish?
matter right there at the county recorder's office.
Right, but
You
what
can,
does
you,
that do? It clears you for the responsibility of that mortgage. That's what it
no,
does.
no, you're
No.
satisfying the deed of trust. Now, a
Okay.
lot of people simply just go and revoke deeds of trust. That's a whole different technique. But if you want to correct it and get it reconveyance, this would be a method that you could do that.
Okay.
All right, well, moving right along then. Uh, let's look at this other.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, okay, so if you fire all these guys, if you kick them out of the deed of trust, you need to tell them, to cease and desist. This is just typical business.
Mhm.
If you get rid of somebody in a business, you just tell them, hey, you know, turn in your company card, turn in your pass card, turn in your keys, turn in all this kind of stuff, and stop doing anything in regards to this business. Cease and desist. Okay, that's what's in order.
Mhm.
All right, notice hereby given to the following parties, title company, MERS, the bank, or whoever you got involved in your situation.
Mhm.
To cease and desist from any further action in regards to deed of trust. Uh, excuse me for a minute here.
Mhm.
So turn in your pass cards, your keys, the company car, and all this kind of crap. All right, so demand is made.
Mhm.
Any and all records, assets, and items belonging to said trust are hereby demanded to be turned over to the trustor, John H. Smith, immediately. Any and all monies received for or on behalf of the trust are to be immediately surrendered to the new trustee, Bill Brown, to include any monies received by sale of the promissory note signed by John Smith and tendered on the date of, whatever the date of closing was, to the agent for the title company, prior trustee in fraud, and sold by the bank and being held by the bank in trust. So you're saying you're fired, you know, give me all the stuff. Now, if they don't, now what we got? We got a real problem because they're holding something which they legally can't hold. The money in the accounts, they can't hold that. They've been fired. Give it back to the trustor. You see, if you just understand a little bit of trust
Right.
law and all this
Right.
kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and start to think, what can I do with that knowledge? Pardon me. As solutions in commerce,
Mm-hmm.
I've used the analogy that, when I was a carpenter, I had a toolbox and I had several tools in there. Like, say, for instance, I had at least three kinds of hammers in my toolbox. A finish hammer, a framing hammer, a roofing hammer, whatever. So depending on what job it was, that's how I decided which hammer to use. Now, it's the same thing that I've tried to do is to give people a toolbox. And in your toolbox, you're going to have trust law. You're going to have all these elements that I've over the years tried to put into your toolbox.
Right.
And so when you get into a situation, you look in your toolbox to see what tool that you have to deal with that particular function. And that's why I've tried to, give people as broad an education as possible to put as many tools into your toolbox that you could use. Excuse me, I get all excited and I start coughing. Anyway, just recently, I re-recorded some of the subject matter from the seminar we did, I think, last September on trust and equity. And that if you go to it's a can you hold just a minute?
Yeah, not a problem. Hang on. Give me a minute. Go ahead.
Tell me when we're back.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. Anyway, what I was trying to impress is that uh, that with the education program that I've tried to put out, I've tried to create as many tools for your toolbox as possible. And so I do this in the form of DVDs. And the most recent one that we put out is about trust and equity, is how, is how to use equity to enforce trust and so forth. And I think people would be well served. I've gotten some very good compliments on that new DVD. So go to the website, look it up, and get it, and put it in your toolbox, so that in the event that a situation would come up, where you could utilize that tool, you got it.
Right.
It's so hard for people. They call me up, and one fella sent me an email and said he's going to traffic court in about 4 or 5 days, and what did I think about what to do? I said, well, if you'd told me that a month ago, I would say, get that DVD on traffic tickets, so you'd be prepared. But I said, in the short email, there's no possible way that I can instruct you of how to conduct yourself in traffic court.
Right.
That wouldn't have been ever so much better for him to have already had that tool in his toolbox, so that when he went to
Yeah.
traffic court, maybe he'll have the judge, try
Begging
to
him for mercy.
beg for mercy like that one did. Oh, that's just funny stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean it's important. This is why it's a study. It's a study for when you need it and to be prepared for when things happen in life. Because when it happens, it's oftentimes too late to start doing the research.
Yeah,
Because it's a learning process. There's a learning curve involved. Yeah.
there is, man. And so many people, have not had any experience in certain areas. Okay, what is the probability that everybody listening to this is going to get a traffic ticket? Pretty high probability. Now, don't it make sense today to
Yeah.
learn how to deal with that, rather than, you get a traffic ticket, and you send me email saying, how am I going to fix this? I can't tell you at that point how to fix it. It's
Right.
impossible to educate somebody on an email on how to how to deal with a traffic ticket, in 2 or 3 days in the future. Can't be done.
Yeah.
In regards to these mortgages and these foreclosures and stuff, don't it make good sense
Mm-hmm.
to start to study these things so that you would have the ability to deal with it? Because, like I say, so many people call and say, man,
Mm-hmm.
we're way down the road on this foreclosure down here. What can be done? And at that point, about the only thing I could say to them is see if you can get into a Chapter 13 bankruptcy to give us a little bit of time to work with it, because they don't know anything about how to handle it. And I can't
Yeah.
educate somebody, in 10 minutes how to solve a complex problem. So, I try to encourage them, if they can, to get into a Chapter 13. They'll put a stay on the foreclosure, and then once we get into the bankruptcy, we can start to work on it. Because a lot of people don't know this, but within a bankruptcy, you can sue a civil suit. And so that's what we're trying to do, is get into a court situation. And like I say, I just have to work with people at whatever level they come with.
Right.
But wouldn't it be so much better if somebody calls me up and says, well, I got this thing going on, and I have studied. I've studied on the, civil court DVDs. I've
Mm-hmm.
studied on the mortgage situation. I've studied on this. It's so much easier to work with somebody like that. But if
Yeah.
somebody calls me up cold and says, I don't know anything about any of this, what can I do? Then I'm really stuck.
Yeah.
I'm stuck,
Right.
because now I got to re-educate them from the ground zero. Whereas if they already had those elements in their toolbox, now we can
Right.
have a meaningful conversation.
Right. Exactly.
So
Winston
please,
doesn't have a magic wand.
yeah. So please don't call me up and say I'm going to court tomorrow. What can I do?
Oh man.
I
No.
say, well, yeah,
Yeah, definitely. Nothing.
yeah. It's really difficult. And I know people are frustrated, in situations and stuff. But I mean,
Mm.
it, it'd be the same thing if you had court tomorrow and you was praying at night before you went to court and asked God, what can I do about this? He's going to do the same thing I do. Throw his hands up and say, oh, I don't know. What do you want me to do? Send an angel come down there with a drawn sword or what? I mean, this is the reality of what we deal with. All right,
Okay.
now we're kind of running for time, but there's one more thing I want to show. Uh, now,
Well, I think sometimes people do that, Winston, just because they just find out about you as they're researching their
well, yeah,
situation.
sometimes that's true.
Sometimes it's not like they're waiting till last minute, but they just didn't know that there were solutions until
Yeah.
5 days before, and then, but it's not enough time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but there are some stall tactics we can do.
Yeah.
Like I say,
Till they get up to, yeah.
people that have absolutely no knowledge at all, might come to me and say, what can be done about this foreclosure? At the very least, monkeying around with the system.
Mm-hmm.
I can generally keep people in the house anyway,
Mm-hmm.
for 6 or 9 months. And that'll give them a chance maybe to build up a little nest egg so they can move on down the road if we can't completely resolve it.
Right.
And so again, I don't do work for people. I educate them, I teach them, and I suggest what they can do, but I can't. People keep asking me, Winston, can you resolve this problem for me? And I say no, because you would take up all my time, and I couldn't have a good effect on a whole lot of other people. So I'll teach you how. You go do the legwork. You stand up for yourself,
Right.
and that's the only way I'll operate.
Yep.
I won't operate the other way. I can't. First off, I don't have time. Now let's look at this particular thing as we had shown on that other cease and desist. Where we demand that they turn over all these things to the either the trustee or to the trustor. Now, when they don't do that, what should we do? Now, this is called an action in recoupment. And again, this is a bare bones court filing, a court case that you could file.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice how I come right down the middle of the page
Right.
with this suit. And there's a reason for all that. I don't have time to go into it now. Now,
Right.
when you use the Uniform Commercial Code, always use the code in your state. The UCC will be statutized almost word for word in your state statutes. So never, if you do a court case in the state, never quote the Uniform Commercial Code. It's private law. Now you could, well, that's complicated, but Uniform Commercial Code is private law, merchant law, but it has been statutized in your state. So if you do a civil suit in your state for recoupment or anything else, use the UCC site in your state. For instance, here, just as an example, we're going to we're going to utilize Utah Code Annotated. That's what it's called in Utah. Utah Code Annotated at 70A-3-305. Okay? So again, we're utilizing the state statute in this suit. All right. So on this suit, we got John Smith, again, as the claimant, or what people would typically call the plaintiff. But I decided, because I'm styling this case in this manner, that I'm going to have John Smith as the claimant and the ABC Corporation Bank, whatever it is, as the respondent. Now, again, we're going to do this in affidavit-style pleading. All right, so we start right out. As an affidavit. All right. So again, we establish the jurisdiction and venue. This is the proper court forum to hear this action, as John H. Smith, a man, resides in Washington County, and ABC Corporation does business in Washington County, Utah. Okay? So we're giving the court jurisdiction because we have proper venue here. Now again, because we always, my feet are cold, and that's why I'm coughing. Anyway,
sorry about that.
Because when we ask the court to do anything for us, we have to indemnify the court. So we write a bond directly into the pleading. So for and on the record, this is the bond of record to initiate the matter or answer the matter regarding case number 1234 and associated matters. Therefore, I, John Smith, state the following: this is my firm offer to pay any and all costs lost by the court and the respective actors thereof, to be determined by the appropriate officer of the court to indemnify this court and other respective. So what I'm saying here is, you can bond. You don't have to write out a separate bond like everybody thinks. You can bond. You can bond your action right in the pleadings. See, so this is a lot easier way to do it than writing up, some other kind of bond. Okay, the facts. Now we're going to recite the facts that we're dealing with. Claimant as authorized representative for the straw man did, on the date of January 2nd, 2005, enter into a mortgage agreement with ABC Corp. And then, see Exhibit A, which would be a copy of the, mortgage agreement. Claimant did on April the 2nd, tender under, again, we're going to quote the Uniform Commercial Code about tender of payment. So we're going to use the Utah Code 70A-3-104A, which corresponds directly to UCC 3-104A. Anyway, promissory note and full satisfaction of mortgage agreement. In other words, what had happened was, and I see a lot of people doing this, you don't need to do it, but I see a lot of people doing this, is they'll try to tender yet another promissory note. So in this situation, this example here, that's what's happened, is that somebody, after about 3 years, decided they would try to tender another promissory note in satisfaction of the mortgage as they supposed. So that's what it has reference to here.
Okay.
or if you've never done that, then just leave that line out, of course. Okay, respondent has not, as of the date of this filing, dishonored nor protested that note, either the one that was given in 2005 or the one that's 2008. Again, this is a bare bones skeleton pleading. Item number 6, ABC Corporation is in possession of the note. ABC Corporation has refused to discharge the mortgage agreement. ABC has refused to submit a reconveyance deed to claimant. ABC Corp is involved in unjust enrichment for having the remedy for mortgage agreement and refusing to discharge the debt and release the lien on the real estate covered by the mortgage agreement. Okay, unjust enrichment.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Fact and tax settlement. Claimant has paid the tax in this matter and filed appropriate OID A and B with the IRS and appropriate copies to all payers, recipients, lenders, and borrowers. Okay, so that's a little bit technical for people. You don't have to do that. Anyway, now talking about recoupment. So claimant is entitled to recoupment in this matter under Utah Code Annotated 78-3-305. So in other words, what 305 is saying, that you as the maker of the note, it's your asset. Remember how we talked about on the account payable side, the note is an asset to the maker and liability to the bank? Remember that discussion we had
Right. Mm-hmm.
some time ago when we were talking about mortgages a little bit? All right, so that's basically what 305 is going into.
Okay.
And that is the note is actually the property of the maker. And the maker can demand it back anytime they want it back. You can demand that note back anytime you want it. It's yours. You're the maker. Okay?
They don't give you
Now,
the original, though. You only just get a copy.
but here's the kicker, 306.
Okay.
All right, so claimant has stated a claim, which is 78 3-306 or UCC Article 3-306, upon which relief can be granted. Now, what that 306 says, and of course, if you were writing this out as a full court case, you would have that, you would quote that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, basically, what it says is, if the note can't be produced, then the maker is entitled to all the money the bank got from the use of it. And folks, that's going to be
That's huge.
pile of money.
That's huge.
That's going to be a pile of money.
Well, how do you show they received any money, though? You have to show that.
You have to do a subpoena deuces take them.
Yeah.
So again, your ability to do something like this depends on your knowledge and your tactical skills and so forth in civil court. That's why I'm saying get educated.
Yeah.
Get educated, because somebody brand new could never do this.
You're putting us to shame. You always joke around saying, I'm just a hillbilly and all this. You're the smartest hillbilly I ever met in my life. You're smarter than most non-hillbillies that I know. And I'll tell you, you really don't sell yourself short. It's amazing and remarkable.
Well, I am creative, and when I have a toolbox full of tools,
yeah.
And I open up my toolbox and I look in there and say, man, what could I do with all this stuff? And so I start to think about it. How could I use this? How could I use that?
Yeah.
And so it's not that I'm so smart, but but I am creative. I can figure out, how to do things.
Well, you put us to shame. I'll tell you.
I would say that.
Yeah, I think you do.
Don't make yourself sound something that you're not.
Well, most of us are just ignorant, though. It's not our fault, but we're
lack of knowledge.
Yeah,
and that's what Solutions to Commerce is all about, is to educate people.
That's right.
You see. So this action in recoupment, is something I came up with. If people want to pursue this, again, it would depend on your tactical skills in civil courts and your ability to operate properly and so forth. So again, this is not to be attempted by somebody that don't have any skill.
Yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. And don't go
Yeah.
blaming Winston if it doesn't work or something happens, because you have to study this stuff if you really want to understand how to use it. It's not,
Yeah.
there's like even just making the statement, if you're going to write, you have to write it out. You can't just cite the code 7,
Yeah.
A3-305. You need to write it out what it says. I mean, that's important. That's important to note. But if you're
All
not used
right.
to writing legal documents,
Now what we're going to do is leverage them. We're going to give them a way out.
leverage.
If they don't want to produce all the money under 306, okay. So release claimant is entitled to the following: either under 305, I want the note back, or under 306, I want all the money you made from it, or set off the mortgage agreement. Now, what do you think the bank would choose?
Set off the mortgage agreement.
Yeah. So we're using a little bit of leverage here on the release.
Hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So set off the mortgage agreement, release lien on project, and reconveyance the deed, blah blah blah. So anyway, there's a bare bones skeleton example of how you would file a suit in recoupment based on UCC 3-305 and 306.
Well, isn't this a part of our unalienable rights?
Well, yeah, you can say that, but
Well,
again, when you
it's
get
in our.
into well, now wait a minute now, because you enter into a mortgage voluntarily. It's a
Mhm.
private contract, as I pointed out, the statute
Okay.
staple.
Okay.
So you can't be talking about unalienable rights in that regard, because equity does not uh, foster a volunteer.
Yeah, but you can't live on this planet if you don't have a home. So, I mean, I know you don't have to have a mortgage, you don't have to own it, but you can't live.
Well, what would happen to all the houses in the country if nobody ever went into yet another mortgage? Would those houses be occupied? Well, sure they would,
Sure they would be. Of course they would be. Yeah.
and
People need homes.
probably more of them than are presently occupied.
Right. There's many that sit unoccupied because of these foreclosures, and the banks have no one they have these liens, and
Now,
there's no one to
in a
occupy them.
community, where everybody says, no, we're not going to do any more mortgages. We're going to just take what it is. And so the community looks around and says, okay, in our small town here, we've got 100 houses sitting vacant. Now, what are we as a community going to do about it? Get the sheriff over here. Let's get these people into these houses. I don't care if they got the title or not.
Mm.
So what would a community do? They would tell the banks to stuff it.
Mm.
And the sheriff would come in and say, okay, these people are going to live in these houses. And if anybody comes from the bank, it's just like it's just like in that movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Anybody comes from the bank with papers, they shoot
Winston's not advocating
them.
that you shoot
Yeah.
anybody.
Well, but
Just for
I'm
clarification.
just saying that.
It's funny.
What if the people in the community said, we got 100 vacant houses out here, we got people living on the street,
Right.
up under the underpass and everything, and we're going to put them in those houses, and by God, ain't nobody going to do anything about it.
Mm.
Because you come around here, we'll deal with you.
Yeah.
What would happen if people had that attitude? Yeah, so all these vacant houses are sitting around and everything that have somebody in them, which
We
they ought
wouldn't
to have.
we wouldn't be in this mess if people had that attitude.
Exactly.
Yeah, people, we have to get with it. Come on, man. You gotta
All
have
right.
some
So
you gotta have some
again,
principles.
we've come to the end of our time, and I have
We
another
have.
commitment I need to go to.
Oh
But
yeah.
when I get a little time, a little bit later on today, I'll send you all those articles
All right, very good.
so you can have them available for
Okay.
people that would like to look at them.
All right, thank you, Winston. Thank you so much. And I'll tell you, folks, this is some rewind it, listen to it again. I'm going to do it myself, and just be prepared, because you never know when you're going to find yourself in a situation, and you're really going to all of a sudden panic and realize you need solutions, and they're already here for you. So
Yeah.
don't wait until you're up against a deadline or something. Because really, in this day and age, it's only a matter of time before you find yourself in one of these situations. It's not traffic court or civil court. It's really only a matter of time. So it'll cross your path one of these days, if not more than that. But so it's not. It's really an investment in yourself and in your own peace of mind. So, Winston's not a lawyer, so he can't, he's only one person. I mean, you can't hire him to do the work for you. It's about taking our responsibility for ourselves. So, Winston, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you. Thanks for bringing this great information, as always, enlightening us. Appreciate it. Good to see
Okay.
you. Good
Well,
to see
good
you.
luck
Take
to
care of that
everybody.
cough. Take care of that cough, Winston.
Yeah, I'll put on some warm shoes. I'm just kind of sitting here, with
What do you got? Flip
just
flops on?
got my socks on and stuff. So
Socks. It's cold. Got to get warm,
yeah,
man.
we have had some cold weather here.
We had like 75 degrees the other day. I was walking on the beach. 75 degrees.
Yeah, I
And
saw
it's
where up there
freezing.
in Michigan, they all their snow melted off all of a sudden. Man, they had flooding.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Michigan State University, all the ball fields and everything were flooded and
yeah.
whatnot.
It's crazy weather, but I do have that chemtrail cough. So thanks to the terrible particulates floating around in the air. But look, good to see you. We'll see you back next week for another episode of Country Roads, and we'll see where Winston brings us. Folks, remember that Goldfish Report is viewer supported, so we ask that you become a patron of the Goldfish Report if you like the quality of information that we're putting out. And also remember that Winston does have these DVDs available. You can I will always have the information in the description section where you can go on his website to find this information. It's good as a library to have if you have a library of books of information. This is a great addition for a library and also a great gift, I have to say. So again, now, you've heard that Rich Yellen, who is a radio host over in the UK, who basically broadcasts mostly for David Icke, he has been completely removed from YouTube. No explanation given, just the usual, you're violating our user agreement or whatever. So this is really very serious and insidious censorship. So folks, please do your part and spread this information far and wide so we can help as many people. You'll be part of this. You're part of our Goldfish Brigade. You're part of, the waking up of humanity. And the quicker and sooner we all wake up, the less power that they have over us. And the more, as Q said, as we were pointing out in the beginning of this video, the power is in numbers, folks. It always is, but we have to really see that there's a sense of urgency here. So you can also go to www.thegoldfishreport.com. There's always a donate button there as well. And again, you can follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we will see you on Monday with another POTUS report, and we'll continue with our Q updates as well. So, Winston, thank you so much. And to our viewers, thanks for viewing. Have a great weekend. And this concludes this edition of the Goldfish Report.